The first thing my mother-in-law did when she found out about the money was call my husband before she called to ask if I was okay. I know this because he told me later, after everything fell apart in the way my attorney had predicted it would. He said she'd called him at 6:47 in the morning, before I'd even had my first cup of coffee, before the dew had burned off the grass in our backyard. She didn't say how is she holding up. She said we need to move before she does something stupid with it. My name is Kelsey Pruitt. I'm 31 years old. 3 years ago, I co-founded a meal prep software company out of a spare bedroom in the house my husband and I were renting in Columbus, Ohio. We had 14 subscribers the first month. 14. I remember because I sent each of them a handwritten thank you note, and my wrist ached for 2 days afterward. By the time I sold the company last spring, we had over 400,000 users, an evaluation that made the acquisition offer feel like a typo when I first read it. $12 million. My attorney, a woman named Judith, sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who makes you feel like everything is already handled before she even opens her briefcase, told me to keep the number quiet until the paperwork cleared escrow. Standard advice. I understood it professionally. What I didn't understand, not yet, was the other reason she said it. There are people in your life, she told me during our second meeting, sitting across from me in her office with her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, who will show you exactly who they are the moment they find out. And some of them, Kelsey, you're not going to want to see. I smiled politely and said I had a good family. My husband's family had always been kind to me, mostly. His mother sent Christmas cards. His father came to our housewarming. His sister had been a bridesmaid at our wedding, standing next to my best friend with a bouquet of white dahlias, smiling in every photo. Judith just looked at me over her glasses and said, okay. She was right, of course. She had been right all along. But I didn't find that out until the night I did exactly what she told me to do. And the phone calls started before I'd even set mine back down on the counter. The plan was simple, in the way that only things designed by very smart people appear simple. Judith had seen this pattern before, she said. A woman comes into a significant amount of money. The people around her, people who'd never shown particular interest in her finances before, suddenly have opinions, suggestions, requests, legal documents that need signatures. She wanted me to see it before it happened, not after. Tell your husband tonight, she said. Tell him the deal fell through. I stared at her. What? Tell him the acquisition didn't close. Tell him the other company pulled out at the last minute. That you lost the deal. She folded her hands on the desk. Then, watch who reaches out to you in the next 24 hours. Watch what they say, and most importantly, watch what they ask. I drove home that evening feeling like I was carrying something fragile. My husband, I'll call him by what he was to me then, which was everything, was waiting in the kitchen, already starting dinner. He had flour on his sleeve. He looked up when I came in and smiled, and for a second I almost didn't do it. Almost. But I thought about Judith's voice. Watch what they ask. I sat down at the kitchen table and told him the deal had collapsed, that the acquiring company had found an issue during due diligence and walked away, that 12 months of negotiations had ended in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes. He set down the wooden spoon, he turned around, and the first thing he said, the very first thing, was not "Are you okay?" or "I'm so sorry," or even just my name. The first thing he said was, "Did you already tell my mother?" Not his mother out of concern for me, his mother as a point of information management. His mother as someone whose reaction to this news needed to be controlled or coordinated in some way he hadn't yet worked out. I told him no, that I hadn't told anyone yet. He nodded slowly and then he picked the spoon back up and he said, "Okay, let me think." I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time. By 9 o'clock his mother had texted me. Not him, me, directly. The message said, "Sweetheart, I heard the news. I'm so sorry. I know this must be devastating. We should talk soon, just the two of us. There are some things I've been meaning to bring up, and I think now might actually be a good time." I read it 3 times. A good time. I didn't respond. By 11, his sister had called and left a voicemail. Her voice was soft and sympathetic in the way that sounds rehearsed, the specific cadence of someone choosing their words very carefully. She said she'd heard what happened and she wanted me to know she was there for me. She also mentioned, almost as a footnote, that she and her boyfriend had been looking at a house, but the financing was being difficult, and she knew we'd talked once about maybe helping out someday, and she just wanted to put it out there, No pressure, she'd understand completely if the timing wasn't right. No pressure. The timing wasn't right. Because I had just lost $12 million, which I had never actually lost. I took a screenshot of the voicemail transcript. I didn't know yet what I was collecting evidence of. I just knew something was happening that I wanted to be able to see clearly later. The next morning came fast and wrong. My husband had gotten up before me, which was unusual. When I came downstairs, he was at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a legal pad covered in handwriting I couldn't read from the doorway. He closed the laptop when he heard me on the stairs. "My mom wants to come by this weekend," he said. "This weekend is soon," I said. "She wants to help." He poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "She's been talking to her financial planner. She thinks there might be some options we should look at, given the situation. Given the situation, as if my failure were a situation to be managed rather than a loss to be grieved. As if the right response to his wife's professional collapse was to schedule a meeting with his mother's financial planner. I said that sounded fine. I called Judith from the car on my way to the grocery store. "It's working," she said before I'd even finished telling her. "I don't understand what it's working toward." "Come to my office Monday," she said. "Bring everything. Screenshots, voicemails, anything they've said in writing. And Kelsey, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let them schedule any meetings." I asked her why. She paused for just a moment. "Because I've been doing some digging into your husband's family's finances. And there's a reason they're moving this fast." I sat in the grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes after I hung up, watching a woman load paper towels into her trunk, watching a kid chase a stray cart across the asphalt. Normal Saturday things. I felt completely outside of all of it. The weekend came anyway, the way weekends do. My mother-in-law arrived at 1 o'clock on Saturday 20 minutes early, carrying a tray of cookies she'd baked and a manila folder tucked under her arm. She set the cookies on the counter and kept the folder. My sister-in-law came too, unannounced, which meant it hadn't actually been unannounced. They'd planned it that way. My father-in-law stayed home, which I noticed but didn't comment on. We sat in the living room. My mother-in-law had a particular way of arranging herself in a chair that made her look like she was running a meeting. Back straight, ankles crossed, folder now resting in her lap. She expressed condolences about the deal with the same tone you'd use to discuss a minor inconvenience, a flight delay, a restaurant that was closed when you drove all the way across town for it. Then she opened the folder. "We've been thinking," she said, "about the house." I looked at her. She meant this house. Our house. The house my husband and I had bought 2 years ago, the one with the bathtub I'd sat on the edge of 3 nights before. She explained, with the measured calm of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this, that the house was in both our names, and that in light of recent developments, she kept saying that, recent developments, like it was something that had happened to the weather, it might make sense to restructure how the asset was held. She said she knew a notary. She'd brought the paperwork. "Just to protect the family," she said. "You understand. The family, not me, the family." My sister-in-law was nodding along from the couch in this small continuous way, like a bobblehead in a car going over gravel. My husband was sitting next to her and he was very, very still. I looked at the paperwork. The folder was neatly organized. 2 documents, both with my name on them, both requiring my signature, one of which would transfer my ownership stake in our home to a family LLC I had never heard of, and had certainly never agreed to form. "Kelsey," my mother-in-law said, her voice dropping into something softer, more intimate, the voice she used when she wanted to seem like she was on my side. "I know this is a lot, but this is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be handled quickly, before things get complicated." Before things got complicated, by which she meant before I talked to a lawyer, by which she meant before I understood what I was looking at. I closed the folder, I set it back on the coffee table, and I said, very calmly, that I needed to use the bathroom. In the bathroom I texted Judith. I took photos of both documents through the folder's clear plastic cover. I sent them to her number and typed, "They're here. Right now, I have the documents." Her response came in less than 3 minutes. "Do not sign. I'm sending you something." What she sent was a single paragraph. I read it twice, then went back to the living room and sat back down in my chair. My mother-in-law looked at me expectantly. "I'm not going to sign these today," I said. The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically, it was subtle, the way the air pressure changes before a storm. The way sound seems to go slightly muffled a second before thunder. My mother-in-law's expression shifted through several things in quick succession: surprise, recalibration, and then a particular kind of controlled disappointment she usually reserved for restaurant service she found inadequate. She said, "Kelsey, I really think, I know you do," I said, "but I'm not going to." My sister-in-law leaned forward. "It's not a big deal. It's just paperwork." "Then it'll still be just paperwork on Monday," I said, "when I've had a chance to have someone look at it." The room went quiet. My husband looked at his hands. My mother-in-law stood up, which meant the meeting was over. She took the folder back, she kissed me on the cheek and said she'd call me soon, and her voice was warm and entirely empty of anything real. They left at 2:15. I locked the front door and called Judith. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her everything. The folder, the LLC, the notary already arranged, the phrase "before things get complicated." She listened without interrupting, and when I finished she was quiet for a second. "Kelsey," she said, "the deal did close. Monday morning, you need to know that. The money is in escrow and it clears Wednesday." I already knew this. But hearing her say it out loud in that moment, while I was standing in my kitchen with cookie crumbs still on the counter and the smell of my mother-in-law's perfume still in the air, something landed differently. "The documents they brought," Judith continued, "are not to protect you. The LLC is held entirely by members of your husband's family. If you had signed, you would have transferred your half of the house to an entity you have no ownership stake in. You would have given away approximately $430,000 in equity." I held onto the edge of the counter. "And Kelsey," she said, "this isn't the first time they've done something like this. I found 2 prior instances, one with your husband's aunt, who signed documents under similar circumstances after her divorce, and one with a former business partner of your father-in-law's. Both resulted in significant financial losses for people outside the family." She paused. "They're organized, they know what they're doing." I stood in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. The cookies were still on the counter. I picked one up and ate it. It was very good, actually. Butter cookies with a little sprinkle of sugar on top. She was an excellent baker. That was the thing about her, she was genuinely excellent at certain things, and it made it so much harder to see the rest clearly. Monday came. I went to Judith's office. I sat across from her with my hands in my lap, and she walked me through what she'd found, which was thorough and methodical and devastating in a quiet way, the way a structural report can be devastating. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. She had documentation, bank records showing a pattern of funds moved through the family LLC over 7 years. Correspondence that included my husband's name on several threads. Not peripheral involvement, not just being in the family. Active, knowing participation. I looked at the documents for a long time. "What do I do?" I asked. "That depends," Judith said, "on what you want. Do you want to be fair, or do you want to be protected?" "Can I have both?" She almost smiled. "You can have both. It'll just require some precision." The next 10 days were the longest of my life. I went home every evening and cooked dinner and talked about ordinary things, and watched my husband check his phone in the particular way he'd been checking it recently. Slightly angled away from me, screen dimmed. I watched him and I felt something I didn't have a clean word for. Not anger exactly, not grief exactly. Something older and duller than either of those. The feeling of looking at something you'd believed in for a long time and realizing the shape of it was always slightly different from what you'd thought. Judith moved quickly. She always moved quickly. By the end of the first week, she had filed for a legal separation on my behalf, which triggered an automatic freeze on any transfer of marital assets. She had also sent a formal letter to my mother-in-law's attorney, and yes, she had an attorney, a detail I found I wasn't even surprised by at that point, notifying them that the asset transfer attempt had been documented and that any further contact outside of legal representation would be added to the record. She also filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office regarding the prior incidents she'd found. That one would take longer, but it was filed. The day everything came to a head was a Thursday in October. Cool outside, the trees just starting to turn, the specific gray-gold light that Ohio gets in autumn that I had always loved. My mother-in-law arrived unannounced, which meant she knew the formal channels were closed, and she was trying to get around them. She knocked on the door with the particular rhythm of someone who expects it to open. I opened it. Judith was standing 3 feet behind me, which I don't think my mother-in-law expected. The expression that crossed her face in that moment, I'll carry it for the rest of my life. It was the face of someone who'd built a very careful plan and just watched it become irrelevant. She said, I just wanted to talk to you, personally, without all of this. Judith said pleasantly, that's not going to be possible today. My mother-in-law looked past her at me. Her voice shifted into something that was supposed to feel like love. I recognized it because she'd used it before, at the wedding, at Christmas, on the day I'd brought over homemade soup when she had a cold. She knew how to make it sound like love. Kelsey, she said, you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away your marriage, your family, your future, over money. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the cookies on the counter. I thought about the folder under her arm. I thought about what Judith had said, organized, they know what they're doing. If it was about family, I said, you wouldn't have needed the notary. She stared at me. If it was about love, I said, you would have asked how I was before you asked what I was going to do with the house. Her face did something complicated, tightened, then tried to soften, then tightened again. She said, we raised him, we gave him everything. You don't get to just. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm keeping what's mine. She left. She didn't slam the door, which was almost worse. It closed with a soft, controlled click, the sound of someone who was going to regroup and try another angle. But there were no other angles available. Judith had made sure of that. The settlement took 4 months. In the end, I kept the house, my business proceeds, and a clear enough view of everything that had happened to feel something close to peace about walking away. My husband and I had a final conversation in a mediator's office on a Tuesday morning. Both of us in different chairs, neither of us looking at the other very long. He said something near the end about how he'd always been caught in the middle, about pressure, about loyalty to his family. I didn't argue with him, maybe it was even partially true. But being caught in the middle and choosing a side are two different things, and he had chosen. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. The hardest part was the first morning I woke up in that house alone, really alone, with his things gone, the closet half empty, the coffee maker back down to a single cup setting, and realized that the version of my life I'd imagined was gone in a way that had nothing to do with money. The money was fine. The money had always been fine, had been sitting in escrow the entire time, untouched and unaffected by any of it. The thing that was gone was smaller and larger than that, simultaneously. It was the belief that I had been seen clearly by people who claimed to love me. But here's what I didn't expect. How much space opened up afterward. I called my best friend from college, someone I hadn't talked to enough in the previous 3 years because I'd been building the company and then navigating the acquisition and then dealing with all of this. We talked for 2 hours. I went to see my grandmother, who lives 3 hours away in western Pennsylvania, who made me grilled cheese and asked me every question she could think of and made me feel, for the first time in months, like someone was interested in me rather than in what I had. And Judith, at our final meeting, handed me a folded piece of paper across the desk. She said, I found this in the original trust documents from your company's founding. A clause you signed during incorporation that you probably didn't read carefully. She paused. Almost no one does. I unfolded it. It was a beneficiary designation for a separate intellectual property rights holding, established during founding, that I had indeed signed and entirely forgotten about. It had never been touched by the marriage, never been part of any of the documentation, never come up in any conversation. It was held entirely in my name. It was worth more than the acquisition. I looked up at Judith. She said, your original attorney, the one who helped you incorporate, was very thorough. I laughed. I laughed in her office with a kind of helpless disbelief that I hadn't felt since I was 24 and got my first subscriber email. I laughed until my eyes watered, and Judith looked at me with the expression of someone who had seen this particular reactions before and found it professionally satisfying. On my way out, I stopped at the door. I said, did you know about this when you told me to tell my husband the deal fell through? She looked at me for just a second longer than necessary. Then she said, I knew there was a reason to look carefully. I didn't know exactly what we'd find. I walked out into October. The leaves were fully turned now, the whole street burning red and gold, and the air smelled like wood smoke from somewhere down the block. I sat in my car for a minute before starting it. I thought about my mother-in-law's voice saying we need to move before she does something stupid with it. I thought about the cookies on the counter and the folder under her arm and the very careful way she'd arranged herself in my living room chair. I thought about the click of the door when she left. I thought about what Judith had said on that first day. There are people in your life who will show you exactly who they are the moment they find out. She was right, they had. And because they did, I had seen them, really seen them, for the first time. I started the car and drove home to the house that was mine, completely mine, on a Tuesday afternoon in October when the light was gold and sharp and everything ahead of me was, for the first time in a long time, entirely unknown. I didn't mind the unknown anymore. I'd learned what certainty actually cost.